to today's social system mapping community practice sense-making session. Your hosts today are me, Christine Capra, and Lisa Negstad, and we also have Kara Martner here, who is my usual partner in crime and handles technical stuff and makes sure you have the links you need, etc. And she's not on our slide today because I didn't think she was going to be with us, but yay, she found out about a half an hour ago she is, so glad about that. So she's with us as well. So for those of you, we're going to do intros in the chat in a moment, but just for those of you who are brand new to this context and don't know what this is really about, I want to help get you grounded in what we're all here for, so that you can decide if this is what you want to do with your hour and a half today or not. So this is really about a vision and a possibility. So there's this kind of mapping that we will refer to frequently in all of our sessions called social system mapping. And we believe that this kind of mapping can help communities and change networks become self-organizing more quickly and more wisely, and can catalyze greater potential in all kinds of collective transformation initiatives. So at the highest level, this is about leaning into that possibility and turning our vision into a reality. It's also an opportunity to learn about this kind of mapping, as well as to get familiar with and literate in the body of theory that supports our belief in the potential of this kind of mapping, that informs our mapping practice, and that is an essential ingredient of our map reading process. It's also an opportunity to contribute your own experience and expertise to this emerging mapping practice, because it's not just about theory, it's also about lived experience and insight into the dynamics of people working together in complex circumstances. And if you're here, you probably have some thoughts about that, because that would have been part of what drew you, and you probably have not only thoughts, but experience and insight to share. So it's a community of practice and field building with an intent for all of us who are part of this to become carriers of a culture of generative transformation. So social system mapping is foundational to this community, but not all of us are mappers. Some of us are here to learn mapping, others are here to inform the practice, others out of curiosity about what's possible, and others just because of the community itself. So if you are interested in hanging out with us, we really would welcome you to do so, and for whatever reason. And then lastly, it's a relationship with a particular social system map that represents and is sort of the scaffolding for our own community, because sorry, I got myself tongue-tied. So, and I'll give you a glimpse of that map, a quick overview of that map in a few minutes. So basically that's what this is. This is one small session within this much larger context. And if, having heard all of that, you feel like you're in the wrong place and aren't interested in any of what I just said, feel free to jump off and do something better with this hour and a half. There will be no hard feelings, and you'll always be welcome back if and when you choose to return. So that's what we're up for. But if you're going to stick around with us through this session, our objectives today are basically that you come away with a sense of the potential that we're inspired by, that you meet. I mean, we know you're not going to get it. It's not a thing that one can get all at once, but just have a sense of it. Hopefully you'll meet some cool folks and feel welcomed by them. You'll get at least a little bit curious about human systems dynamics, which we're going to talk about, and social system mapping and how those two can work together. You'll be able to identify the difference between traditional planning and using adaptive action cycles, which are much more relevant and useful in complex adaptive systems, which change networks are. And you'll be able to start sensing the context that pull you back into traditional planning, so that you can be more aware of your own mental shifts and be intentional about them, and not sort of what I call drinking the Kool-Aid, like, oh, this is the way it's always been done and this is how things work, and you just sort of get pulled right back into that because of how strongly we've been indoctrinated. So for today's agendas, in just a moment, we're going to do some introductions in Mentimeter and find out about your experience with both social system mapping and HSD. Then we're going to do an introduction to social system mapping, and look at that map briefly. We're going to put you into some breakout rooms, and you'll stay in those breakouts twice through the session today, so you get to know each other a little bit at first. And then we'll do some human systems dynamics theory. Then we'll do some longer breakouts for you to work through some of what we've talked about, report backs, reviews, community announcements, and feedback. So let's go ahead and have you, oh, Kara, have you put the I don't have the chat open.
I put the link for the slide.
Yeah, for the, no, for the Mentimeter link, you can put it in the chat. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to go into Mentimeter, which is this link. Now, for those of you who are new to Mentimeter, I'll be sharing my screen, and you're going to have a better experience if you just go back into the Zoom dashboard and see the screen I'm sharing. And sometimes you'll be inputting your own information in Mentimeter. So you're going to need to sort of toggle back and forth. And if that is just not technically feasible for you at the moment, feel free to just put your comments in the chat, and then just keep an eye on the screen share. So go ahead and in the Mentimeter, once you're in there, share your name, your pronouns, location, networks that you are supporting, networks that you're supporting in some way. Put them all together in the same comment field so we can see the wholeness of you to that little teeny minimal surface amount. And anywhere that I'm suggesting that there's a place to put input or to put comments, don't feel obliged. You don't have to at all. There's no command performances here. And also, when there will be places for comments in a moment, and feel free to answer more than once. So you just put your ideas in and hit enter and put another idea in if you have to. So even though the technology is a little restrictive, we're trying to make it as flexible as possible. And if you're done and you want to scroll, but I think you need to look back at my shared screen to see everyone's responses. So if you want to, with me, look at who's here and where they're coming from. This is really fun. We've got somebody from Tunis who's working on sustainability networks. We have France and Montreal and Birmingham, Alabama, and Minneapolis, which is where I also am, and I'm not putting it mine in there. Iowa, California, and Kara, can you put the link for the Mentimeter into the? Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Just had another person pop in. So to the person who just popped in, Kara, maybe, or can one of you put the link back in there again in case that person didn't have access to it? Right now we are putting introductions to ourselves in the chat or in the Mentimeter. I'm going to move forward. You can finish inputting your information, but I'm going to go on to the next one. If you could think about one big challenge that you experience in doing collaborative work in networks, you can put that into the Mentimeter, into that input place. Like, what's a thing that maintaining engagement? Yeah. Momentum. We have a narrow worldview. Yeah. I mean, I sort of assume that anybody who comes to these has had some sort of community network experience. They probably wouldn't be here. And so I know we've been sort of moving towards working in collaborative networks for a while, and they have a lot of potential and there's a lot of excitement around them. And when we've been doing it for a few years or several years, we start to realize that there are certain kinds of challenges that just keep popping up. And so part of what we're doing in these sessions is trying to figure out how can we work with those challenges and what can we do to resolve some of them, or at least move forward with them. So self-organizing at multiple pathways with a common set of principles, balancing an invitation to mapping with sense-making, institutionalized thinking, drinking the Kool-Aid, demobilization, discouragement, and time for everyone is always an issue. Okay, you can finish putting input in there if you're not done, but I'm going to move to the next slide. So just want to get a sense for everyone who's present of how familiar you are with social system mapping. So this next slide is just a quick poll asking you where you're at with that. So we've got people who are pretty experienced and somewhat experienced, and someone who doesn't even know what we're talking about, which is great. I'm always glad to have new people show up who don't know what we're talking about and try to get better at the challenge of explaining what that is and helping them get on board, you know, getting aware of what we're talking about as quickly as possible. I'm going to go to the next slide. You can continue putting your information there. If you just go forward with the slides at your own pace. You can't get ahead of me, but you can catch up. This one has to do with human systems dynamics, which is a school of complexity thinking and systems thinking. Just want to see how familiar we are with that as well. So we have someone who's really not familiar with either, which is great. We have a little bit of range of familiarity with sort of across both of these frameworks. So people who've been through HSDP but are still learning about HSD or social SSM. Okay, let me go to the next slide. And so a quick overview, what is a social system map for those of you who are brand new and who don't know what we're talking about. And just know that it will still probably be a little bit confusing after this. I'm gonna do my best, but it's a complex thing. And so it takes a while to really wrap our heads around for all of us. So a social system map is really, I like to call it a mashup of a system map, something like this, a stakeholder map. These are various stakeholder maps, asset maps. This is an asset map. This is an asset map, a social network map, which this might have been one, concept maps. So it has, so as I say, it's a mashup of all of those. And so one of the things is that though there's a whole lot of visual similarity between a social system map and each of these maps, what's different and unique about a social system map is that it includes dimensions from all of these other maps and more. So it's far more layered, it's far more dense and far more complex than any of these would be on their own. So it's also more of a process than a product. It lives online in a platform called Kumu. It's interactive. It's accessible to all members of the network. It's iterative, emergent, dynamic. It can keep changing. It's not a one-time snapshot, but it evolves over time. So what a social system map is not is a quick fix, a standalone solution, a replacement for live relational engagement, a product as opposed to a process. And it's because it's so dense, it's not always immediately clear how to get the most out of it. It's also not a social media curation or communication platform such as Twitter, Facebook, Mighty Networks, et cetera. It sort of has some similarity to those, some resonance to those, but it's really a different kind of animal. Okay, So social system mapping, so that's what it is. What it's about is basically systemic transformation. It's about supporting a global movement that is working to shift from systems of dominance, exploitation, and extraction to systems of connection, reverence, and regeneration. We recognize that the foundational structure for this global scale systemic shift is strong networks of wise change agents. And networks are the most ubiquitous structure in the world, so you would think that it would come naturally for us to enact change through collaborative networks. But what we've learned in the past decade or two of this work is that social change networks actually are really challenging. And many of us believe that the root causes of what makes large-scale systemic transformation so hard, and therefore the reason that collaborative networks can be so challenging, is due to two fundamental worldviews that are just sort of ground into, these are the Kool-Aid that I'm talking about. These are the things that our beliefs that are so deep for many of us that we don't even see them. And so those worldviews are this separate self worldview of, dog eat dog, and we all have to look out for ourselves, and that's just human nature. We just have to learn to live with it. It's not going to change. We're not really, we're always going to be competing with each other and scrabbling for what little there is. So that's the separate self worldview. And then the other one is this mechanistic worldview, this sort of mechanistic understanding of how change happens. Because all of the larger scale systems that we're talking about transforming are what we call complex adaptive systems. And these just don't work like machines. We can't control them and we can't predict what will happen in them. So we need a different understanding of how to create change in complex adaptive systems than the approaches that grew out of that sort of old school Newtonian worldview. So when I say drinking the Kool-Aid, I'm talking about both of these worldviews. And we believe that social system mapping can help address both of those challenges, because but not in and of itself, a map's not going to fix this for us, but it's a tool that we can use, a lens that we can use to understand at both of those levels and begin to shift our thinking. And in fact, these two paradigms are really two sides of the same coin. They work together to reinforce one another, but we often experience them as separate, and we sort of learn about them separately. And so we're naturally drawn to focus on one or the other of them because we have an affinity both either to our, cognitive logic world or to our warm, fuzzy relational world. But if we focus on one and not the other, either one and not the other, I feel like the other one is just going to keep pulling us back into the Kool-Aid, into the old worldview, because they're both very strong and they reinforce each other. So I believe that it's not sufficient to look at one or the other. I believe we need to work on them both at the same time. Social system mapping undermines the separate self worldview in ways it can help us understand the relationships and create stronger and more mutually supportive and more strategic relationships. But the visual dimension gives us something that we've never had before. We've never actually been able to see the relational structure of our networks and see how the connections are, what's flowing through the connection. So now that we can see that, that gives us a whole new level of insight and understanding around the relational level. And it also supports deeper understanding of change in complex adaptive systems. As I said, the mechanistic worldview, because a social system map in and of itself is complex, and it requires a little bit of learning about complexity to really get the most out of it. And so it's a tool that you can use in a context that's meaningful and relevant. This is our community. I just realized I totally forgot to share our map, and our time is getting tight, so I'm gonna wait with that, or might even skip it. But so it's a tool that we can use in complexity, and that will help us learn it in a way that's meaningful, which is we learn more deeply when it has to do with ourselves. Oh no, see, it's next. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna do a quick peek at our map. And so this is the Kumu platform. The data gets gathered in a tool called sumApp that we have, that my partner and I, my husband, developed, that was designed to make these kind of maps, which I'm not going to show you right now. It's just basically a fancy survey tool for this purpose. But the platform we actually can view the map in is called Kumu. Each of these nodes is a person, each of these dots is a person. We can move the people around, or we can click on them. If we click on a person, so Joe is right there in our Zoom thing, but she's also here on our map. This is all the information that our survey tool has asked Joe about herself. She can update this information whenever she wants. So this is what we call a directory view. We can have filters. Filters can be based on anything. So here are the people who are supportive of social system mapping, but not invested. There's the questions that you can ask are totally custom and designed for your context. And then, so this is another view. We end up making maps that have different views that are designed to focus on different elements of the system, or different lenses into understanding the system. So this is a view. This is sort of our SNA view. Oops. We can filter on who's collaborating. So now we're just seeing the collaborations in this network. We can click on lines and see, about my relationship with Aldo Demore. Whatever, we can click on, let's go back to here. So there's a whole lot that we can do with this. And for instance, I was going to go to the offers and asks view. We can also show relationships to various skills that people need or want help, either are willing to offer others in the community or want help with. So there's just a whole lot of ways this can be used. There's a lot of data here, and figuring out the best way of what we want to ask, helping people understand what they can do with that data, how to present it, are part of the complexity thinking that happens in using social system mapping. So that's a quick peek at our map. I'm going to give you now, we're going to have you go into, oh no, there was one more thing. No, sorry, I keep forgetting the order. Have you go into breakouts for 5 minutes. Kara, do you have them ready to go?
We have 3 groups of 3 and 1 group of 2. Somebody had to hop off for a call.
Okay, that's great. So you'll have 5 minutes. I'll have you introduce yourselves, location, networks, or core work, which I know you already shared, but just sort of share in a personal way the things you shared already in Mentimeter, and just really identify who's brand new and needs information from the others, and the experienced people help everyone feel welcome and connected. So, questions about the breakouts? Go ahead then, Kara. Welcome back, everyone. Okay, so I'm sure you all had I hope you all had good beginning conversations, and just know we'll continue those shortly. One of the things that really, in complex adaptive systems, one of the things which Lisa's going to talk about, the adaptive action cycle in a moment, but when we get into that long-term mechanistic worldview approach to solving problems in complex adaptive systems, we can create all kinds of unintended consequences. And so if I'm just going to share my screen again and share, oops, hang on. A really short video about unintended consequences, which is fun and informative and cautionary. Can everybody hear my audio? Is that good? Okay.
In the 1950s, the Dayak people of Borneo, an island in Southeast Asia, were suffering from an outbreak of malaria, so they called the World Health Organization for help. The World Health Organization had a ready-made solution, which was to spray copious amounts of DDT around the island. With the application of DDT, the mosquitoes that carried the malaria were knocked down, and so was the malaria. There were some interesting side effects, though. The first was that the roofs of people's houses began to collapse on their heads. Turns out the DDT not only killed off the malaria-carrying mosquitoes, but it also killed a species of parasitic wasp that had controlled a population of thatch-eating caterpillars. Thatch being what the roofs of the Dayak people's homes were made from. Without the wasps, the caterpillars multiplied and flourished and began munching their way through the villagers' roofs. That was just the beginning. The DDT affected a lot of the island's other insects, which were eaten by the resident population of small lizards called geckos. The biological half-life of DDT is around 8 years, so animals like geckos do not metabolize it very fast. It stays in their system for a long time. Over time, the geckos began to accumulate pretty high levels of DDT, and while they tolerated the DDT fairly well, the island's resident cats, which dined on the geckos, did not. The cats ate the geckos, and the DDT contained in the geckos killed the cats. With the cats gone, the island's population of rats came out to play. We all know what happens when rats multiply and flourish. Pretty soon, the Dayak people were back on the phone to the World Health Organization, only this time it wasn't malaria that was the problem. It was the plague and the destruction of their grain stores, both of which were caused by the overpopulation of rats. This time, though, the World Health Organization didn't have a ready-made solution and had to invent one. What did they do? They decided to parachute live cats into Borneo. Operation Cat Drop occurred courtesy of the Royal Air Force and eventually stabilized the situation.
Oops. Okay. So, while I get myself out of there, I mentioned before, we have these sort of two layers of work that I believe need to be happening to make collaborative networks work. One is at the relational level being how do we build strong relationships? How do we build trust? How do we undermine the historical dynamics of various kinds of power and trauma and privilege? How do we work through those in a way that creates strong, trusting relationships? That's the relational level. And that is absolutely crucial. But I believe it's not enough because there's also this level of systems. And if you don't understand the context and you don't understand how the things are fitting together in a system, you can have the most trusting relationships in the world, but you still may be not able to engage with the system in changing the systems that you're trying to change in the ways you want to. So I feel strongly that we need to be working at both these complexity, the cognitive level and the relational level, and the cognitive level is what we're here to think about today. So we often work on the relational level in other contexts, but here we're talking theory, as I've said. So with that, I'm gonna just hand it over to Lisa. And I'm not sharing my screen, right? Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm shutting up.
Can you please share your screen?
Yes.
And then you might need to mute because I'm hearing a double effect there. Thanks, Christine. Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Negstad. I enjoy the community of practice of social system mapping. I'm a social system mapper. And also I am trained in human systems dynamics. And I just put the link in the chat, which is the Human Systems Dynamics website, and their resources section is really, really powerful. There's a lot of great resources there. So yeah, if you could share your screen, Christine, and we'll start here. We'll use this to kind of mark where we are. As Christine just said, we're going into the cognitive part. We're going to do some theory. What we like to do is give you a human systems dynamics method or approach, and it's a way to make sense, do sense making with a social system map. And really, as Christine has been talking about, we're talking about these complex adaptive systems. And there's kind of two things that we need to shift in our mindsets when we're talking about complexity and complex adaptive systems. Is we need to shift from expertise to inquiry. So we can't really rely on expertise, because in complexity, it's unknown. The future is unknowable and we can't predict. And we also want to shift, and I'll have you do the next slide, Christine, here. From all these mechanistic ways we've been taught how to do planning, from strategic planning to operational planning to work planning, some of that can work if we are working in a place where we can, like a kind of a topic that we can predict and we know what the outcome is. But when we're talking about complex adaptive systems, we can't predict the outcome. And so traditional planning doesn't work. So we have to shift to a new way of doing planning. It really is a planning tool. And so what we're wanting to do today is show you adaptive action and show you the tool and how it works, and then really think about how do we need to shift in our thinking as we're working with our networks and our collaborative places that we are and our self-organizing systems. How can we use this tool? So let's just look at what this tool is, adaptive action. Many of you are familiar with it. I want to do a few rounds of just going through what the tool is, so that you have that in your, just kind of as a reminder if you're already exposed to it, or you have an introduction to it if you haven't been exposed to it. And then we're going to talk about that mindset shift as well. So let's go through some cycles here. If you could do the next slide, please. So in complexity, change is happening on these many different levels. There's massively entangled problems, and we can't predict the outcome. And change actually happens in these moments. So let's just take COVID as an example when we're talking about a complex adaptive system and how COVID worked. We had a lot of technical expertise that knew there was going to be a pandemic at some point. They were studying that. They have been studying how zoonotic diseases translate, from animals to humans. There's all of that, but there wasn't an ability to predict exactly when it was going to happen, where it was going to happen, what animal it was going to transfer from. Any of that wasn't able to predict, but the change happened with all of these things underneath that. It happened in this one moment in China, and then it spread, and here we are 2 years later. So I think that's always such a great example as we're trying to wrap our heads around complex adaptive systems. So, expertise is useful, but then we had to shift into asking the questions, and we're continuing to adapt and ask questions like, what's going to work to prevent this? What do we learn from all the way vaccines work? What do we learn when people aren't vaccinated? What do we learn from the different mutations of the virus and all of that? So let's look at this adaptive action model. And really what this does is we try to find the right scale, and then we ask these questions in order. It seems deceptively simple, but it's a really great process for trying to identify those patterns that are most present right now in this moment that we're in, and then use that identification of the pattern to assess what is most present at this moment, and then move into action with that. And then we do the cycle all over again. So adaptive action, we start with the what, which is this cross section of observations. It's what we've learned already, what we know and are seeing right now. Where are we feeling the most tension at this moment? And trying to get a good cross section too, so that we get a lot of different perspectives in the mix with this step. So that's the what step. I want to just take a moment though and explain with this model. One of the things that I really like about it is that it works well if we have a system that tends towards kind of one or the other, like it's kind of stuck in analysis. This is a great model because it has the analysis step, but also moves us to action. And it's also great in a system that maybe is very action oriented, that tends to be more activators and action oriented. It helps them stop and take a moment to absorb the learning that they've had and move into that action. So back to the model, what is that first step? Is that cross section of data and information we're seeking. And then we go to the so what. So let's do that one next. And the so what is really the stage where we're taking that information and we're making meaning of it. So we are making sense of that information, where we are trying to filter out what is most important for this moment that we're in, and seeing like, what does this mean for most people involved? What are we learning right now? And what are the risks and benefits of these different pieces of information that we've learned in the what step? And then once we've done that, something often emerges. This is a very emergent place. We're watching for what's emerging right now. And then we're going into the action step, the now what? And that's the next wise action. That's what we're wanting to try. That is something that we're going to go off, take a look at. We kind of figure out who's doing what, and then we come back and report into that iterative cycle. Someone mentioned prototyping in the chat. It's very similar to that. We're doing cycles and we're learning, and all learning is good. So this is it takes a neutral stance towards failure or success. We learn just as much, whether we've failed or succeeded. So that can really help with that sort of psychology of perfectionism that a lot of consultants and leaders can get into as we're thinking about this. So let's take some like real life examples of this, and Christine and I are gonna play together with that. So Christine, let's start with, I want to interview you on an adaptive action you did around this community of practice. And let's start with the what step. And I think, let's see, do you have your speaker on?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what was the what step that you took? What was kind of emerging? What did you notice in that step?
Okay, so this was a while back, and I was noticing that, especially in these sense-making sessions, but in anything, any time I was presenting anything, I was feeling a tension around, am I aiming for brand new, am I trying to help brand new people find their way into this? Or am I trying to help experienced people dig deeper and go further in it? And so I was always having this, because there's always both in the space. There are people who show up over and over and over and are very experienced, and then there are brand new people, and I would be afraid I was boring the experienced people, but going too fast for the new people, and doing too much presenting like I'm feeling right now. And so there were these tensions in me around that difference between in experience level.
And then what was the so what step? What did you discover as you went into the analysis?
Yeah, so what I realized was that, well, I could reduce some of the presentation and have some of the experienced people do some of the helping of the new people understand what this is. So I kind of take a Montessori model and have someone a little further ahead helping someone who's newer at it, and that would both reduce the presentation time, it would increase the relational dimension, and it would help both of those different experience levels be more engaged and get some practice or get some learning that they could use.
And then the now what stage was?
I changed the structure of these sessions to do what we're going to do in a few minutes, or to do what we started in that 5-minute session and then in the breakouts. Today it won't be exactly like that because we have a size limit, but what we usually do now is in these sessions, we put experienced people, we split up the experienced people each in their own breakout room, and then we put the new people with the experienced people with the explicit understanding that the experienced people will be welcoming, belonging, creating guides and not lecture, but also help you. so not pirouette.
Like I'm doing right now.
No, you and I have to do that a little bit, so it's different, but yeah, to make people feel welcome. Yeah,
that's excellent. Thank you for that example.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's go back to the slides here and just talk through these shifts then. So if we have the adaptive action method and tool to use in this, it's a tool that helps us do that helps us shift from expertise to inquiry. So it's kind of, we have to be reminded that this is the shift we're trying to make when that mechanistic view that many of us have been trained in for many years, how to shift that. And so shifting from expertise to inquiry means watching for those places we get put in expert place and sucked into this belief that we need to bring the expertise, and shifting to asking those questions. And there's another great example that I was gonna check in with Christine about and interview her a little bit about with this and her role with social system mapping. She often gets placed in this to bring the expertise in how to do the social system mapping and what exactly the client needs. And Christine, could you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, well, I was just thinking about how I have this half hour where of office hours every week, and sometimes somebody will show up. They're a consultant. They are, they're working with networks, and they want to do a social system map. And they will say, I don't know, I want to start a project, and I don't know where to begin. And here's all this complexity about it. Like it's at the global, it's like Scott states, but there's local. And so they start just sort of throwing all this stuff at me. And I'll spend the first 10 minutes of this conversation having a panic attack, because I'll feel like they expect me to know it. Like, I don't know. Like, I just want to say, I can't help. Don't look to me. I don't know anything. But then when I sort of catch myself, what I always end up realizing is that I just need to help them understand, like their clients are they've gone to their clients, they've sold this thing, and now they're expected to be an expert on it. And they're looking to me to sort of prop them up in that expertise. And all I can do is say, okay, I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions as if you were the client, and you need to go back and ask them, like, where's the energy? What are the current biggest tensions? What are your goals for your network? Like, I'll just sort of start with a list of questions and explain to them that I can't answer, like, there is no one way to do this. There is no perfect process. But what I keep noticing is that consultants have, we all do it for a little while, drunk the Kool-Aid, and feel like I have to provide this perfect plan, and Christine is going to hand it over. And I'm like, I can't. And then by the end of the time we talk, they end up going away realizing, oh, right, duh, that's not going to happen. That doesn't make any sense here. And I just need to go back to the client and help them understand complexity, and not try to provide something that we all know in our hearts is not going to work. So, but that happens. So that's one example of how that shows up, and these are all smart people. These are people who know systems thinking. These are all people who understand complexity. It's not like they don't get it. It's like the worldview that gets presented to you is so strong that it takes a moment to I have that panic attack moment when I feel inadequate, and I have to notice that in myself and then move through it. So that's an example.
Yeah, thank you. I can relate to that. I'm also noticing when you're giving that example, Christine, about how I found that some of these HSD methods and models have been helpful if the client is also feeling an anxiety, right? Like, oh, you just want to wade into this and see where it goes, but actually having a model, like, well, so I always teach my clients adaptive action, because that's how we plan what the next step is, and we use adaptive action together. And then the win is when the whole committee that I'm working with is just using that as the next time we're having the meeting. That's great. Okay, and then the next one here slide is the planning to adaptive action, and getting out of this mindset of planning. And in interest of time, Christine, I think what I'm going to do is go to that table and have people kind of read that. There's a lot on this. So I want to give a moment to have you kind of absorb this, where we're looking at what's traditional strategic planning, the kind of typical things that are done there, and what adaptive action planning looks like, and how that actually, you can see how that fits better in complexity. And Kara just put the link in the chat if it's easier for you to take a look there. It's actually a much more in-depth document there. And just give a moment. I'm actually going to give you a moment to read through this, and maybe give you one example of me getting in the trap of traditional strategic planning. And then we're going to go into breakouts and just have you think about, we have an adaptive action for you to do around kind of your mindset and thinking about complexity and these features that we're talking about. So why don't I give maybe 3 minutes to read through this, and I'll come back. We'll be quiet while you're doing that. Okay, we're gonna move along here. I invite you to go to that link that Kara put in the chat if you want to have access to this and keep revisiting it. There's a lot in there. So often with adaptive action, the place we start with just trying it out is three sentences. We have to think about the sticky issue. Like the example of complexity and issues is when the problem seems massively entangled. You start to pull one thread and the other ones come along with it, or it's just one that you keep thinking you've solved and then it comes back, right? So these kind of sticky issues, and often we can just start with writing 3 sentences about it. Like if in Christine's example with the community of practice, she may not have immediately thought, oh, it was because there was kind of a gap between those who have done social system mapping and those who are brand new to it. She might have just felt a tension in that training or meeting, right? Where she's like, something's not quite working in these meetings. And it was that where she started to explore that, like, what are 3 sentences she write about that? And then it was the so what, where she probably discovered in that tension, it was those 2 groups. That's where the tension was feeling for her in those 2 groups. That's often how we dive into the adaptive actions and do that. For the breakout rooms, what we're wanting you to do is to just be doing some reflection about your own experience with this, about shifting that mindset we have to do in complexity. So the first question is, what is a time you used traditional planning and it didn't work for you, or it had those unintended consequences that we saw with the cats in Borneo video? And you can go back to that table and maybe there's a line in that table where you're like, oh yeah, I got caught in that trap at one point and it needed adaptive action instead. And then the second question is, what did you notice about when it's most difficult for you to set aside your expertise? When is it most difficult for you to shift into inquiry instead of sort of saying, I know this? And then, so what did you learn from these? And now what's one, maybe there's something you want to shift in your practice. And we'll put you back in the same breakouts. You can just be mindful of time, so each of you get a chance to reflect on these questions and share what you're comfortable sharing, and no pressure. If this isn't really speaking to you, you can listen and ask questions. And those questions are just put in the chat by Christine, so they'll follow you into your breakout rooms. And we'll see you back here in 20 minutes, and then we'll have a little chance for some. Oh yeah, go ahead, Christine.
Oh, just we had some people who came in after the last breakout session, so they might not be precisely the same groups who've done this, but just given the flux of attendance, there might be some people who are in there for the first time. Just want to let you know that.
Oh, that's great. That's good. So everybody can know that you might see your people, or you might have some new people. You can welcome them in. Yep. And yeah, we'll see you back here, and then we'll do some reflection and wrap up when you come back. Welcome back from the liminal space. Do we have everybody back yet? I'll just wait, check with Kara here. I believe so, yes. Welcome back. So just curious, we have a few minutes here. We can open it up and hear what you're discovering as you did the breakouts. And if you're willing to speak into the room, you can either raise your hand or just go ahead and unmute yourself and speak into the room, or put anything you want in chat too, if you prefer that.
Eloise, looks like you're.
Yeah, I was just thinking if no one's if there's some space. Yeah, the chat was really insightful in our session, very rich sharing and different experiences. And I think something we touched on was talking about change over time. Mary was describing kind of, and we entered into a discussion on funding and how it's focused on very short-term cycles and doesn't support systemic change over longer periods, and that those kind of benefits are not accounted for and kind of invisibilized. So Mary was talking about her experience of that. And it's also interesting for me, I'm working in sort of future foresight and encouraging organizations to think longer term and look at longer term timelines, or even intergenerationally. And yeah, so we were just talking about the narrowness of focus, and Nam had a really good point about how design especially is often focused on the problem and very narrow. And so how do we broaden the framing and the timelines were two kind of key topics for us.
Wow, there's a lot in there. That was really wonderful. I'm thinking about one of the things that we talk about in human systems dynamics is zooming in and zooming out, and trying to figure out what the right focus is. And doing adaptive action can help us figure that out. Like we have to step out with that time frame. And also, I work with philanthropies, or one of my clients, and I see them starting to understand this, but how do we help them to see that there's these that these short-term outcomes, and funding around that really perpetuates the current system, right? It does not help the system change. So, helpful insights. Anybody have any reflections on that, or want to add in insights from your group?
Well, I'll just say that one of the things that I'm noticing in our community of practice over the last several months is a tendency that we all have to say, okay, here's a problem or a challenge or a tension, and to immediately go to solution and say, okay, here's the solution. And then the first solution that gets mentioned, people just start exploring and running with. And so I've been noticing that, I've been trying to figure out how can we like slow that down and actually explore the problem a little bit, and then explore our theory of why the solution is a solution, and just like take a step back and do some reflection before we just dive into a solution that's going to take 10 months to implement anyway. And we haven't even gotten certain that that's the right solution yet, or that, and again, even if we thought it was the right solution, to test it as we go, to break it down, do a little bit, see, is that helping, do a little bit. So we've been working on that. But the key thing I'm just thinking about is that tendency to jump to solutions. Like that's how our minds.
Christine,
yeah, John.
If I can just jump in just to underscore your great point about that the first solution is maybe, if you just invest all your resources in the very first one, that can be wrongheaded. Just a metaphor from my morning ritual of making breakfast for my family. Anybody who's poured pancakes or crepes knows that the first one is probably not going to be the best for, and so it's just kind of a fact of experience that people don't always attend to. Like that first one is probably, we shouldn't just rush into that first one. Let's slow it down a little bit more.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
That's great. What a great example.
Yeah.
Other reflections?
I can go in.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Eloise and Mary, or Eloise already gave a brief of the topics we were talking about. I think one of the things that I understand is that we was talking about this too, that people tend to stick to traditional strategic planning because it is something that is in a way predictable or foreseeable. It makes people feel safer to know, okay, this is direction, this is the predictability of this context, problem, solution. But whereas like in adaptive action planning or systemic design or systems thinking, we don't predict the future. We work on what is it today and what are the ecosystems that we are touching today, and what is the causal loop, what is the action loop. And this unpredictability, this cognitive process of giving away or letting loose on the prediction kind of helps dealing with the nows, with the todays. But if we try to push it forward into corporates, or if we try to push it forward into financial systems, it is still not so welcomed, and that kind of calls for a system for change and system for behavior change. And it also calls for change in the way we are looking at things. And our examples with pandemic, with the current Ukrainian war, with everything, kind of touches the fact that we need to change, and we need to change the way we are looking at our current solutions, at our current way of problem of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah. I'll just bring up a thing that I feel like in a lot of systems change contexts, or a lot of schools of systems thinking, the focus is on helping experts be experts in systems thinking and sort of like manage the change, like be the experts and manage it still in a top-down way. And my strong feeling is that we actually need to share this thinking with the people on the ground, like the people on the ground who are the ones who are doing the actual work, and they need a complexity lens for working in. They don't need someone else to keep guiding them in. I mean, they need that, but they need more. And so that's part of what social system mapping is about, is helping us create a context for learning that together with the people on the ground, so that they're more able to navigate, because that's where the change is really has to happen. I mean, it has to happen at the top levels, the understanding, especially the financial people, but it has to happen at the level of the people on the ground as well. Yeah. So
I'm struck by something that Glenda O'Young, who is the founding executive director of Human Systems Dynamics, she always says, you can only do your own adaptive action. And I think there's all those layers of that, right? Because you start with this feeling, like you were just saying, Namrata, if I'm saying your name right, is that this need for control, right, puts us into thinking that we can predict the outcome. And so we have to do our own adaptive action, so we see that we can't predict it. And then, like, so even though we're trying to control in an area, or maybe it is that we can scale back and do one thing that we can try, and that's part of our control, but I think it's a really profound insight of how human psychology works within human systems too. Other reflections, I'm looking, oh, maybe we need to move into the wrap up things, Christine. I just saw the time here.
Yeah, okay. We'll do that. And let's see. So so I just want to share a little bit with everyone about what else we're doing within our community of practice. Part of our theory of becoming carriers of a culture of transformation is to be really transparent about our adaptive action cycles, and what are the tensions we're processing, and what are we learning in this process, and how are we dealing with that tendency to, have a problem and slap on the first solution. I just want to share. So for those of you who are new to this, we do something just about every Monday morning, every Monday of the week. Most Mondays there's something going on. So keep an eye on your inbox to be invited to other things. Next week, we're going to dig deeper into that social system map that represents our community of practice, and talk about some of the tensions that are in that map, and some of how we're working with that map to make it more iterative, to operationalize the iterative capacity of a social system map. So that'll be next week. And we are with it. And so part of that is we started out wanting to update our map, and we came up with a couple of first waffles and ran with a couple of first waffles for a while, and came to realize that wasn't going to work, and that was becoming a challenge. And so we've slowed that down, and we're using a process of what we're calling briefs, to actually help us reflect on the problem and on the possible solutions that we're proposing, and then take them in small increments at a time. So Jim and Mary, since you're both here, I was gonna see if you wanted to each have a maybe minute of sharing the brief you're currently focused on. Jim, I'll have you go first if you're willing. You can say no if you're not.
Sure. The adaptive action cycle brief.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Christine has been brilliantly centering this process of social system mapping and the adaptive action cycle that Lisa has been talking about all day today. But we don't have a diagram. We don't have a picture of what that looks like. And I am such a visual person that I think there should be a center for that, something that we can put up and talk to. I've been yearning for that. So I have a lot of passion around that and a tiny bit of expertise. And so we're trying to weave that together and come up with kind of a diagrammatic form for what social system mapping as a theory of change is.
So right now it's just a diagram, and that's the brief, is we're just making a diagram and we're not defining anybody's job and we're not slowing any other work down. So yeah, that's Mary, do you want to talk about your brief, the questions? You're muted and you don't have to if you don't want to. I'm just.
Yeah, we're working on new questions for our survey that will lead to new views. And so people from the community will be able to suggest new questions, which we're really looking forward to. Some of you may be like me, when we started mapping, just use like a standard survey. And so this is really moving forward to a ecosystem picture and sort of a creative approach, from appreciative inquiry. There's the statement that questions create the world we want. So that brings up how important questions are and how the views and what we see and how we look at what we're doing as an ecosystem is really creative. So I've created a brief just to look at 3 questions that we will potentially add to the map. And we have what we call a harvest basket that right now has 23 proposed questions or ideas to think about. So
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah.
So at any rate, so I can see we're over the hour, so I want to honor everyone's time, but want to let you know, come back and you'll learn more about all of the things that we're doing, and we invite you to come and play some of these games with us as we get them more clarified and more transparent and more easy to step into. That's sort of the big challenge right now, is making it easy for new people to step into the places that are meaningful and relevant to them. So we're going to continue to work on that as transparently as possible. And now we'll do our goodbye ritual, which we do at the end of every session, which is everybody unmute if you want to do this with us. You don't have to, obviously, but we're going to all unmute. I'm going to count down from 3, 2, 1. And when I get to 1, we'll all just give each other our blessings and our good wishes for the day. And then as that's going on, feel free to jump off. So invite you all to unmute, and 3, 2, 1. Thank you all so
Monday,
much.
Hugs to all.
Thank you so much for
Great
joining
week,
us.
everybody.
To meet my new friends,
to be
Melanie and
with you.
Sam and Jonathan.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah,
Take
thanks.
care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.